Pick up where we left off this morning. We did a lot of discussion about some of the way God has led me into ministry, the miracles He did to get me from where I was to where I'm at today, and I explained that our message today is not your typical evangelistic type message where you just throw out a bunch of facts and dates and say, now go out and do it. You know, this is more like we're talking about with math. We have our pure math and applied math, where the pure math you learn theorems and all the boring stuff, and then once you learn it, you find out how to apply it in your real life. Well, this is how evangelism has been applied in my life, and also I'm going to share another gentleman who puts me to shame when it comes to evangelism. I will talk about him shortly. Oh, and before I forget, I did tell you I was from Tennessee, so I speak a little bit different here than most people. So if you have trouble, if I start speaking too fast or put 10 words into one, say, slow down, I didn't understand what you said, and I won't be upset. My wife warned me before I got here, Tony, talk slow, enunciate your words well. She speaks good English. She's from Jamaica. She speaks very proper English. But I'm trying to teach her hillbilly, but she doesn't want to learn it. So, but we've been married 22 years, so maybe she'll learn here sometime in the near future. And so, we talk about evangelism. We understand about the cycle of evangelism. We prepare the soil. We plant the seed. We do the harvest, all these things, and we start over. And so this is not what this is about. That's just a manual of how to do it. And so today we're going to just find out what God really does in a life of somebody that's willing, and sometimes not even willing, to allow Him into their lives. And so since you went to all the trouble to bring me here today, I want to share with you how God can use ordinary people to fulfill His commission and complete that work that should have been done a long time ago, but thankfully wasn't, because if it was, we wouldn't be here today. So when we get to heaven, we can thank the pioneers that they dropped the ball, because we can be there with them. But we want to finish it now. We don't want to wait more generations for them to come preach and say, we're thankful our parents didn't do this, so we want this to end. So in the earlier messages, I spoke of how I'm a third-generation Adventist, and I was raised in the church, went to academy, and then, like a lot of our young people, took a hard turn the wrong direction, made a lot of bad choices. And I didn't make it easy for the Lord to bring me where I'm at today. I certainly made it difficult for Him. I was the Adventist who knew the truth, knew it, believed it, knew it was the remnant church, believed Sister White, even though, they used Ellen White, like I was saying earlier, all the stuff, Ellen White said this, Ellen White said this, Ellen White said this when she didn't say this. If you're raised an Adventist, you probably heard all that. Well, I believed all the truth, but I was the one who did not care. I strayed. I fully, without any reservation, did it on my own free will and did not care. I was the apostate in the family, and I didn't care. I didn't lose any sleep over the decisions I made. My family, they tried sharing with me all these truths that, we're right here in the toenails of time, all these things. They tried sharing. I know. I believe it. I know what you're saying is true. I agree. I don't care. I do not care. I've got other things on my mind. How do you reach a person like that? That's the hardest person to evangelize to, is someone who knows the truth and still refuses to accept it. There's one way that you can reach that person. See, I forgot to mention, this is entitled The Non-Motivated Evangelist. That was me kind of, sitting back, didn't, care. But so how do you reach a person like that doesn't care? One word. Prayer. Intercessory prayer. My mom and I, we had this talk, and she told me about when I was doing all these things in the world. When you're a parent, you see your child making decisions, you know they're going to send them straight to hell. You don't have to judge that person. They already say, I don't care. And so we talked about it, and she told me the prayer she used to pray, but she would say, Lord, I know Tony has free will, and you can't make him do what he doesn't want to do. You can't force him to stop drinking. You can't stop him from smoking pot. You can't stop him from doing all these things. But Lord, would you find some way to make it a little less enjoyable? A very ingenious prayer. I'll tell you, that prayer works. God cannot force your free will. He cannot, and even He could, but He won't. He will not force your free will. But what He can do is change the way that your body may react to certain things. Something that smelled good may smell bad. Something that tastes good may taste bad. Something that felt good all of a sudden may make you feel bad. His desire was to make alcohol affect me differently. It got to the point where if I even took a sip of anything, I was sick for 2 days. I believe there's a drug called Antabuse or something similar to that name. I didn't need that. I had intercessory Antabuse. My advice to anybody that has a family member or a friend or anybody they know that's doing something they shouldn't. It doesn't always have to be substances. It can be anything that is doing the wrong thing. And if they know the truth and they don't care, or they're just lackadaisical about it, they're Laodicean in their belief, take it to God in prayer. James 5:16 tells us to confess your faults one to another and do what? Pray one for another because of why? That you may be healed. That's a promise right there. That's not a suggestion. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man, and I will put woman in there, it availeth much. Don't pray one prayer and wash your hands and say, okay, I prayed for them. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, sometimes years. But it works. So now we'll pick back up where we left off. You remember I'd gone down to Southern. I was leaving my old job. I was going towards a ministerial degree. My financing was covered. My housing was covered. All my transcripts had come over. Everything was just falling into place. My wife and I, we looked at each other and said, are we coming now? This was supposed to happen in sometime down the road. And we said, yeah. And so we were deciding we were going to go to Southern. And again, this was 10 years ago that this happened. And so we were down at Southern for my son's music program, the At First Sight music program. He was doing a violin camp there. And so while we were there, we were looking at Southern to see what we could do about we're spying out the land to see about a future career change. And, every hurdle had been removed. Money, housing, transcripts, everything. And by the way, if you weren't here this morning, all this happened in a couple of hours. It wasn't in a time frame. This pow, pow, pow. This thing, God was just dropping every domino just as quick as we could throw something up. He was knocking it over. And so instead of waiting, we answered God's call and embarked on that journey that we never imagined would bring us where we are today. So this was in June. We went back to North Carolina in June, put in our resignations for our job. In July, we moved to Southern. In August, I was in class. It happened in less than 3 months. By the way, just for a couple other quick things I wasn't going to say, but I'm going to mention it. 2 other things that happened while we were there looking for our degree. Our son Matthew is a very, very gifted musician. He was 11 years old at the time, and he'd been playing piano for 11 years. Very accomplished piano player. And so he had a renowned piano teacher in Asheville, North Carolina, where we lived. And so one of our obstacles that had to be overcome was to find a teacher for him that would work. And so when we went to the music camp, the guy that used to teach, his name was Dr. Bruce Ashton. I don't know if anybody knows Dr. Ashton, but he was there for 30 years, head of the music department. So we were hoping that he would take Matthew, but He had retired, but he said, my replacement, Dr. Peter Cooper, may take him. He said, but Peter is somewhere in this area. Matter of fact, he was coming to Washington today. I think they said Seattle. And so he was going to give us his contact information. And while we were there, he said, he may still be here. Let's go talk to him. And so we went up there to talk to him, and here he was. You see this thin man, shorts, Hawaiian shirt or something, just chilled out up there playing the piano. And we told him what was happening, and he said, I'd be very interested to hear what your son has, interviewing him for teaching. He didn't teach young kids at that time. He said, well, I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. Can you come back in 2 weeks and bring Matthew? And we said, yeah, we can. And so we left there in his office. We walked down to the Village Market, the little grocery store, the Advent store there across from the school. And there was a sign hanging up there on the little bulletin board where they advertised for stuff for sale. And there's a little 3x5 card handwritten and said, it is written, it's moving from California to Tennessee, and we're hiring a couple types of administrative assistants. And my wife was a secretary. She's a teacher by trade from Jamaica, but she was doing work as a church secretary. So we said, well, we'll go and apply for it. So we went home, she applied, and thought nothing about it. 2 weeks we came back to Dr. Cooper, and he had Matthew play, and he told us, he said, yeah, I'd be honored to take your son as a student. Well, he's a teacher, and so we didn't have any money, and we thought, well, how much is it going to cost us? Usually they charge $100 an hour for teaching. And he said, well, don't let money be an obstacle. He said, we can work something out. And so I thought he was going to say, we'll cut it to $50. And he said, do you think you could pay $5? He said, normally I wouldn't even want to charge you. He said, but when you're doing something, you don't feel like someone's taking advantage of, you feel like you got a little skin in the game. I said, I think we can squeeze it. I think we can swing that. So we went home and put in our resignations, came back to Southern in August. And I started school, and Shan was homeschooling Matthew. And then in October, we were at the store shopping. We were at Walmart. It's a Friday afternoon doing our Sabbath shopping. Collegedale's the only Walmart I've ever been to where you can find Vegelinks. They actually had vegetarian food in there. But we were sitting there shopping, and my phone rang, and it was from a 704 area code from Charlotte, North Carolina. And we lived in North Carolina, but I didn't know anybody be calling from Charlotte. I'm just going to let it go to voicemail. And for some reason, my wife said, let me answer it. She never, ever, ever does that. So I had her my phone, and it was John Bradshaw on the line. And John, he said, we got your application. We'd like to interview you. Can you come down to, can you Skype with us before Zoom? And they were already there in the area. She said, well, we're here in Collegedale. He said, oh, really? Well, can you come down for an interview? He said, I'm out of town, but I will Skype in with my treasurer. So she went and did the interview, met some people there. Met a lady, her name was Carol Geisinger. Carol used to be up in this area, up in the Walla Walla area at one time. But she was in an apartment. She met her down there. And so Shan came back from the interview and said, that's the worst interview I ever had. It went terrible. So she said, I'm all right. Just wrote it off. A week later, she got a call from John again. And he said, out of all the people we interviewed, you were the one that God said was that we were most impressed with to hire. She was probably the least educated. There were some people that came with some degrees that that were really overqualified, and so she was hired there. So other than those other miracles, we had a piano teacher from Matthew that took him on. He's still his teacher right now to this day, which has been over 10 years. And then she worked at It Is Written for 8 years. That she had gotten that job. So while I was working at school, she was able to keep a little extra money coming in. So God kept opening doors for us. And so we're going back now to, you see all these miracles happen. So you think, this guy ought to be ready to burn down the field of evangelism, but I was the non-motivated evangelist. So you wonder, after all of this, how could you not be motivated? I'm getting motivated thinking about it now. How could I not be when it was really happening to me? Well, let me explain. For as long as I remember, I saw a church pastor, and an evangelist as being two separate entities. Even in Ephesians 4, verse 11, it said, some evangelists and some pastors and some teachers. I didn't realize that some evangelists and some pastors could be the same thing, that they were the same. I grew up, you had evangelists who went around from town to town. They travel all over the place, doing a series and moving on. They kind of like an emergency room doctor. You see the patient, you fix them up, you ship them out, and you don't see them again. And then others take the problem from there, and you go on and just do it over and over. That's how I saw an evangelist, like an ER doctor. And so back when I was younger, back in the Stone Age, that's how it was. Local pastors didn't do the evangelism. A conference evangelist or somebody came in and did it. They'd set up an auditorium. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one of these or not. It's like a big Quonset hut that's just got air blowing in and blows up like a big balloon. That when I made the decision for the Lord, I was in one of these, and an evangelist came, 10 years old, and I remember he made the altar call, and man, it's like somebody just grabbed me by the seat of the pants and just marched me up front. I don't know how he got up there. But it's in one of these, but this, the evangelist came in and did these things, and they took it down and went to the next city. They would send out flyers, and those are the days you could send flyers out and people would come. You send flyers out now, and all you've done is spent $30,000 on one or two people that will come that are usually Adventists on top of that. And all the pastor did during this time was just assist the evangelist. You would go in the back room and you do some Bible studies with people. You'd pray with them. You go visit them. Do we still do that today? I mean, during evangelistic series, do we sit back? When the pastor's preaching about the mark of the beast and all these other things, the things that we don't cover, people that have made a decision for baptism, do we go back and start studying with them, or do we say, let's hurry up and dunk them before they change their mind and then go to the next one? But that mindset stayed in my mind, that wall of separation between a pastor and an evangelist. I mean, when I went to Southern, all that I had in my mind is I want to get my district and take care of my churches and leave the evangelism work to somebody else. Let the evangelist come do it. Let somebody else do it. That's not my job. That was my mindset. But one day, during the end of my first semester, somewhere about the beginning, I can't remember exactly when it was one of those pivotal moments in my life. I was sitting here, this is in the religion building at Southern right here, right outside of Dr. Greg King's office. And I was sitting there waiting for Dr. Saman's Adventist Heritage class to start. Now, Dr. Saman and I, by the way, Joseph said Dr. Saman's going to be coming after me. I had Dr. Saman at my church a couple weeks ago, and he said, Tony, when you go to Joseph Dwart's church, make sure that you break the ground so when Dr. Saman comes in, people are ready. He makes me laugh because sometimes I'll see my phone ring and it'll have his name on it, and then he doesn't answer. I pick it up, so I call him back. And, Tony, what do you need? Why are you calling Dr. Saman? I said, well, you just called me. Oh, it must be my smartphone. My phone is too smart for its own good. It's calling you. He's a good man. If you haven't seen him before, you'll really enjoy his program. And if you have seen him, then you know what you're in for. And so I recommend you be here for that tomorrow when he zooms in. So we're sitting on that bench outside of the class, and I looked over to I was sitting here on this part of the bench right here at this end. And so I look up and I see some man come marching down the hall. I mean, he's like a man on a mission. Suit, tie, white hair, white mustache, just zooming down the hall. And I'd seen him before, but I hadn't had a class with him. I didn't know who he was. I knew who he was. And so it was Dr. Carlos Martin, the guy right there on the one with the white hair and the mustache. Love that guy. Good man. And if you've ever seen Dr. Martin, no grass grows under his feet. That man, he runs marathons. He's been running the Boston Marathon on more than one occasion. He's a I mean, he's the Energizer Bunny on speed. He just nonstop. And so as he walked, he went zipping down there, had this 11 by 17 piece of paper in his hand. He walked by and he walked past this bench right there before you get that window, and he stopped and he backed up. And he began talking. Oh, by the way, he was a professor of evangelism and world mission. That was his job. Evangelism was his life. And as a result, he was in charge of the ERC program at Southern, which is the Evangelism Resource Center. And if you're not familiar with it, the way the website describes itself, it's a program that sends volunteer evangelists all across the globe to share the good news of salvation. And that's just what they do. Every summer, they send a group of students. They don't have to be theology students. Anybody that wants to go and do an evangelistic campaign can go. It's a 3-week series that Southern heavily subsidizes at like 90% of the cost. Everything, you pay and you fundraise for the last 10% or whatever. And so anybody that wants to go do it as a student can go. But the one small caveat is that you have to be willing to preach. You can't just go there just for a good time. You have to be willing to preach. And so he stopped in front of us, and he holds up that poster. And he had 10 years worth of meetings they had and a number of baptisms that had been there. And there were hundreds, a couple, 3,000 baptisms. And he was telling us about all that. And he took a good deal of time to explain this program to us. And when he was done, he listed some of the trips, and one of them was Brazil, and one was Mexico. If you wanted to go to Mexico, you had to raise $600. Brazil was $1,800. Which, for a trip like that, that's still, small potatoes. I mean, my son just went on that 3-week tour with Dr. Hiles on the Hope Channel a few weeks ago, and it was over $5,000 to do that. So luckily for him that it was a class, and so it was subsidized because I'm a pastor, which helped out a lot. So that there are advantages to being a pastor, by the way. Some of that you get the conference will help subsidize your kids' education. But he talked about it, and Dr. Martin was excited about it. He was just really, really excited. And this little voice in my head said, why don't you give it a try? I mean, I'd never preached, not even once, not one series, not one word from the pulpit. The most I'd ever done was read a scripture reading. The voice said, you're going to be a preacher. You might as well do it sooner or later. I thought, well, Brazil does sound kind of cool. I mean, it's a 3-week trip. I mean, obviously you're not going to preach the whole time. And so I said, well, let me go ask my wife about it. I figured she'd shoot it down. She was the one working, making the money. We didn't have a whole lot coming in. She looked at me and said, what are you waiting for? Go sign up. You don't get opportunities like this very often. You might not ever get a chance to do this again. And so I did it. And again, guys, listen to your wives. They usually get some pretty good advice most of the time. There's a lot more of the story. I don't, because of lack of time, I can't. If you want to know more about what happened after that, I can tell you after the message. But let me ask you a question, especially if you were here for the earlier service. You remember I talked about my friend Keith, the man who came to prayer meeting, who passed away, and I talked about Mark, the pastor friend of mine, who mentioned if I wanted to preach in his church. Well, what does Keith and Mark and Dr. Martin have in common? They are all evangelists. They lived evangelism. Because when you walk with Christ, thank you. When you walk with Christ, everybody is a mission field. I mean, the whole group, everybody, including the people within your sphere of influence. See, they evangelized within the church. Maybe they didn't even realize that's what they were doing at the time. It was a lifestyle for them. That's what they live and they breathe, evangelism. They didn't even realize the effect it was going to have on my life later on. So you see, in order to reach those on the outside and be effective, we first need to reach those on the inside. Because if we're not converted and ready, God is not going to bring those people into our church. And if He does allow them in there, 9 out of 10 times they're going to turn right around and go back out the door. Heal ourselves first. Jesus even said to the disciples, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You don't go to the Gentiles first. Take care of your home first. Then you go to your people. Had any one of these 3 men passed me by, not being evangelistic in their lifestyle, I really don't know where I'd be today. But I can almost guarantee I probably wouldn't be here right now. Let me ask you a question to ask yourself. When was the last time that you evangelized? To a student? To a church member? To a colleague? To your pastor? I was reading Ellen White this morning. She said there's a lot of unconverted ministers out there. I'm not talking about your pastor. But there's a lot of pastors out in our denomination, and I'll tell you what, they have no business being behind this sacred desk. They need to be evangelized too. To us who are a little bit older, some of the young people aren't going to remember, back a few years ago, do you remember a group in the Middle East called ISIS? At that time when they came about, the world already was not fond of the Muslim religion because of 9/11. And so when you had the remnants of 9/11 and the Islamic fundamentalists taking over swaths of the Middle East, how did the vast majority of our country feel about people of that particular faith, of the Islamic faith? In my mind, they felt probably about like Jonah did with the Ninevites. And if you know, the Ninevites were actually the precursors to ISIS. They were pretty much the same lineage, the same group. So they weren't well received. When you mentioned if somebody came with a hijab or any kind of Muslim garb on, it's like they were worse than in 2022 when someone came around without a mask during COVID. Nobody wanted to be around them. They didn't like them. They were angry. Well, around 2017, my second year at Southern, ISIS was in control of this large territory of the Middle East. And they were doing some really bad things. I mean, honestly, they were doing some pretty horrific things. And I'll have to say, I was one of those who didn't look too highly upon the Islamic faith. If I was on a plane with somebody I thought was in that group, I would have been to the point where I would have said, I don't want to sit with them. It was that bad. And here I'm a pastor in training, and I have those kind of dislikes for people. I'm just being transparent here. A lot of pastors will say it to each other, but they won't say it from the pulpit. And so I lumped all the acts of a few deranged people, and I lumped the whole group in that same category. And so at the same time I was doing my externship, that's training when we're in theology. We go to a church and we work under a pastor, and I was doing that, and I was serving in the capacity of an elder. And less than a quarter mile up the street, guess what was on the hill up there? A mosque. And our pastor had developed a good relationship with the imam there. They were good friends. They would share with each other, eat with each other. They had a good relationship, and I didn't think it was any big deal. And I didn't have a problem. But then it happened one evening during a board meeting. Doesn't always happen at board meetings. The pastor announced that the imam had invited our church leadership for a meal and fellowship, and asked if we would be willing to go up to their mosque for them to share with us. And buddy, for a while, all you could hear was crickets in the room. The conversation erupted and became heated. It was so bad that one woman said, if you do that, I'm going to transfer my membership out of this church. Said, my husband will leave this denomination if you go and do anything with that group. She did. She eventually left. The pastor asked us to pray about it and said, we would discuss it in another meeting. Well, after a time went by, the board met and decided that and as good ambassadors, good Adventist ambassadors, in good faith, we would go. But if anybody felt this desire not to go, that it wouldn't be held against them. But they didn't have to go. It was just a personal choice. Guess what my choice was? Go. Not at first. I was telling my wife, I'm not sure about this. And again, Shan said, she told me, she said, well, you can go if you don't have to go if you want, but I'm going. Making me look bad again. Fellas, if you're looking for a wife, if you found a wife, make sure that you found someone who's a good helpmeet. A good spouse can make or break you. I've seen many good pastors leave the ministry because they picked the wrong person to yoke with. Well, the day came when I'm going to go to the mosque, and I was there at the church, and I was, I'm going. And I was standing there, and all of a sudden, I heard this voice come up behind me and says, "So Tony, are you ready to go to the mosque?" I know that voice. It was a New Zealander with the name of John Bradshaw. Oh, no. I was thinking, how am I going to get out of this one? I couldn't use the same argument I did with Mark the time before, so let me pray about it. By the way, if Pastor Joseph ever asks you to do something, don't say, let me pray about it, because he's heard these sermons, he's going to know what you're doing. And so that was another one of those fork in the road moments, and so if you'd been me, you didn't want to go, and your good friend and wife's employer, John Bradshaw, international evangelist, comes up to you smiling and says, "I'm ready to go to the mosque. You going with me?" What would you say? Sure, let's go. My wife was not happy with me. She said, "I've been asking you for a month to go, and you keep telling me no, and he asked you one time, and you say yes." So, off we went not knowing what to expect. Have anybody ever been into a mosque before? Have you ever been in one? I went in there expecting to see ISIS flags and machine guns, or at the very least to see a Spectrum reporter outside with a camera seeing an Adventist pastor walk into a mosque. But that was my thought pattern, and guess what I saw when I went in? I saw ISIS flags and machine guns. No. No, instead we went in. Man, you could smell the food. Anybody like Middle Eastern food? Oh man, they put a spread out there like you wouldn't believe. And if you didn't want it, they even had pizzas they brought in for those who didn't want to eat it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, nice people, loving people coming up, just telling us how glad they were that we were there, inviting us in, talking to us, caring for us, following Christ's method. And as we talked to them, they were sharing with us what they were going through. You see, these people were stuck in the middle. They were seen by the radical terrorists, the Islamic group, as being traitors because they weren't supporting them. And they were also hated by everybody in the rest of the world because they were Muslims. So they feared for their lives. I felt about that big. Maybe about that big, huh? I was humiliated by what had been going through my mind. I was thoroughly embarrassed about myself. And so they asked us about us, what we did for a living. And we shared with them. We shared with them about it is written. And John was sitting, he wasn't sitting there with us at the table, and I had little cards, about it is written TV. And they wanted them. They wanted to see the programs. They were excited about what we were sharing. God took us and made us evangelists in somebody else's own denomination, in their own mosque. If we won't get up and do it ourselves, He will take us over there. That's how He opens doors. When you talk about the rocks crying out, oh, that was rocks crying out. Sometimes, we think we have to go to the other side of the world to evangelize, and yet we want to go across our own parking lot to reach our neighbors. I mean, the Great Commission says go into all the world, not just the part you want to go to. First, I was unwilling to get started. And then I was unmotivated to go to a place of worship as a representative of Jesus Christ. Even though I could have been going there to witness. I thank the Lord that He put John in that church that day. I was so prejudiced against this group of people, I couldn't even see God's hand at work. How many doors have you refused to enter? Ask yourself that. It could be anything, Bible studies, handing out literature, just telling somebody about Jesus. I mean, sometimes you'll be talking to somebody and the opportunity to present itself and you say, well, I don't really feel comfortable, evangelism's not my thing, I'm not good talking to people, I don't think that was a prerequisite for doing evangelism. I don't think I read that anywhere in the Bible. I think it's go, G-O. I don't think there's any disclaimers or any modifiers to that. Ellen White, I'm just going to put a few of the parts up here, but it's a longer quote. My brother, my sister, ponder these things, I beseech you. You each have a work to do. Your unfaithfulness and neglect are registered against you in the ledger of heaven. Wow. That was a slap in my face. You have diminished your powers and lessened your capabilities. You lack the experience and efficiency which you might have had. But before it is forever too late, I urge you to arouse. Delay no longer. The day is almost spent. The westering sun is about sinking forever from your sight. Yet while the blood of Christ is pleading, you may find pardon. Summon every energy of the soul. Employ the few remaining hours in earnest labor for God and for your fellow men. My heart is stirred to the very depths. Words are inadequate to express my feelings as I plead for perishing souls. Do we have those kind of feelings that we can't express it, that we have such longing to help other people, that we cannot even put it into words? Words are inadequate to express my feelings as I plead for perishing souls. Must I plead in vain? As Christ's ambassador, I would arouse you to labor as you have never labored before. Your duty cannot be shifted upon another. Don't say, you're the pastor, you do it. I've had people tell me that. I've asked them to do work. They said, you're the pastor, that's what we pay you for. And they're going to show them in the Bible what a pastor's job is. It's to equip you to do it, not for me to do it. My job is to equip and evangelize. Your job is to do the work. No one but yourself can do your work. If you withhold your light, someone must be left in darkness through your neglect. During the millennium, we're told there's going to be people who are lost because we did not share with them, and Christ is going to remind us of that. Had you done this, so-and-so would be here today. I don't want that upon my head during that time to hear that. Eternity stretches before us. The curtain is about to be lifted. We who occupy this solemn, responsible position, what are we doing? What are we thinking about that we cling to our selfish love of ease while souls are perishing around us? Have our hearts become utterly callous? Can we not feel or understand that we have a work to do for the salvation of others? Brethren, are you of the class who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not? It is in vain that God has given you a knowledge of His will. Is it in vain that He has sent you warning after warning? Do you believe the declarations of eternal truth concerning what is about to come upon the earth? Do you believe that God's judgments are hanging over the people and you can still sit at ease, indolent, careless, pleasure-loving? Volume 5 of the Testimonies. If you haven't read the Testimonies, if you want a good smack in the back of the head, go read a few of those. I mean, I'm still feeling a few little stings where I got smacked when I was writing this. Time is short. She says, brethren, are you of the class having eyes who having eyes see not and having ears hear not? Is it in vain that God has given you a knowledge of His will? He's given us the knowledge. He's given us everything we need. Did He waste His time? Is it in vain that He has sent you warning after warning? I mean, how many times has He got to do it? Do you believe the declarations of eternal truth concerning what is about to come upon the earth? Do we believe what's coming upon the earth? We can look around us. We can see it can't be much longer. It can't be. Do you believe God's judgments are hanging over the people? I mean, how long has He been in the heavenly sanctuary interceding? Since 1844, 180 years? And we still sit, can we still sit in ease, indolent or lazy, careless and pleasure-loving? Man, she must have been looking at me when she wrote that. If these words aren't enough to motivate a non-evangelist, I don't know what will.